On the night of November 12, 2021, a disturbing sound shattered the silence of the small village of Kvarkino, nestled in one of the most remote regions of the country. From apartment number 23, located on a quiet street forgotten by time, came screams that the neighborhood would never forget. A mix of despair and violence echoed through the walls of that modest building, turning the environment into a nightmare. It was the kind of sound that seemed to come from the depths of human suffering, a suffering so harrowing that perhaps few could ever understand it. It was around 11 at night when neighbors heard what seemed like pleas, followed by a sepulchral silence. In that moment, a final voice was heard, a young, pleading, innocent voice begging for mercy. "Papachka, any ubavai minya, Daddy, don't kill me." The child was fighting for her life in the hands of the one who should have protected her. The sounds grew distant, suffocated. Soon, silence returned, burying those cries in the past. The next morning, Elena Kuznetsova, Anastasia's mother, repeatedly called her phone, but no one answered. Her daughter, who had promised to visit her over the weekend, did not answer the calls. Elena tried everything. She called neighbors, friends, relatives. Nothing. The apartment seemed closed in a silence that offered no answers. But her maternal instinct warned her that something terrible had happened. Worried, Elena asked a relative to go to the address of Anastasia and Alexander to check what was happening. When he arrived at the building, he noticed that the apartment door was slightly open. He entered slowly, calling out the residents' names, but was surprised by a scene of horror. On the floor, darkened, dried blood stains led to the master bedroom, where two bodies lay side by side, arranged in an organized and disturbingly calm manner on the bed. The first officers who arrived on the scene described it as almost theatrical. The bodies of Anastasia and her 3-year-old daughter lay at rest, in violent contrast to the suffering they had evidently endured. Anastasia's body had deep, precise cuts. The child showed clear signs of strangulation. There were no signs of struggle in the environment. It was as if everything had been meticulously planned and executed. As they examined the scene, investigators discovered something even more disturbing: a recording device, still on, hidden among Anastasia's belongings. In a last act of desperation, she had recorded the entire scene. The recording, which would later be found on Alexander's phone, revealed the cruel and disturbing sequence of the crime. With the discovery of the audio, the case took an unexpected turn. This was not just a crime. It was an anguishing record of a deliberate execution, and Alexander, the husband and father, was the main suspect. To understand what happened on that fateful November night, we need to go back a few years to the beginning of the relationship between Alexander Kuznetsov and Anastasia, learning the story of how they got close and how they quickly decided to join their lives reveals signs of a fate laden with contradictions from the first moments. It was in the summer of 2016 that Alexander, then 22, met Anastasia through mutual friends. She was young, only 15, and her appearance still reflected the innocence of adolescence. Alexander, older and already immersed in his own independence, was charmed by Anastasia's youthfulness and simplicity. He was seen by friends as trustworthy, with a steady job and emotional stability, qualities that conveyed to young Anastasia a sense of security and protection. Shortly after their relationship began, the connection between the two intensified. Anastasia's young age and the significant difference in experiences between her and Alexander were not enough to slow down the romance. In less than a year, Anastasia became pregnant, and they decided to marry and start a life together. Amid the challenges of an early pregnancy, Alexander took on the responsibility of being a provider and protector for the young family. He worked as a security guard and also took odd jobs to ensure nothing was lacking at home. Friends and family reported that, at the time, he was a caring father and devoted partner. For a while, it seemed that genuine happiness had settled in the apartment on Central Street, where they lived. Alexander strove to provide a comfortable life for his wife and newborn daughter, while Anastasia tried to adapt to her new roles as wife and mother. She dropped out of technical school and devoted her time entirely to the home and child. Close observers said that Alexander never let anything be lacking and seemed proud of the little family he had built. He showcased improvements in the home on social media and posted photos of happy moments, trying to cultivate the image of a perfect family. But behind this facade, the first signs of strain were already emerging. Anastasia, confiding in some friends, began to reveal her regret over taking on so many commitments so early. At 17, she still harbored a desire to explore the world, study, make friends, and live a youth without so many responsibilities. What once seemed like the security of a stable relationship was now seen by Anastasia as a prison, a bond that prevented her from experiencing life beyond the walls of the small house she shared with Alexander. Over time, this hidden dissatisfaction caused small fractures in their relationship. The fights, once uncommon, began to become more frequent, though discreet enough that no one on the outside knew. Friends of the couple say Alexander felt frustrated with Anastasia's complaints, as she seemed, to him, to forget everything he did to keep the family together and secure. She, on the other hand, lamented the loss of freedom and the feeling of being confined to a routine she hadn't fully chosen. What had once been a solid relationship began to turn into a fragile union, where tensions only grew. Alexander, to closer friends, showed signs of increasing jealousy, which hadn't been there before, and Anastasia, increasingly discouraged, mentioned that she didn't know how much longer she could endure that life. These small, silent cracks foreshadowed what was to come. The image of happiness the couple presented to the world hid a complex reality marked by insecurity, jealousy, and the discontent of a young mother who had never had the chance to fully experience her youth. As the years passed, Alexander and Anastasia's relationship deteriorated at an increasingly alarming pace. Close friends of the couple and neighbors in the small village of Kvarkino, who had once viewed their relationship as an example of love and stability, began to notice deep fissures. The once isolated arguments became frequent. It was clear that the tensions between them had turned into something larger, something that was moving towards an inevitable separation. Christina, a close friend of Anastasia, was one of the few people who witnessed the young mother's emotional exhaustion up close. In private conversations, Anastasia confided in Christina that she felt as though she were imprisoned. Anastasia lamented marrying so young and never having experienced independence. She said that Alexander's control over her life, which at first had seemed like care and protection, now felt like possession. This sensation stifled her, making living together unsustainable. Christina would later report that Anastasia was determined to end the marriage, but didn't know exactly how to leave the relationship without creating more conflicts. Alexander also began to show signs of exhaustion and desperation. The thought of losing Anastasia seemed to awaken in him a mix of panic and indignation. To him, his wife's decision to leave the marriage was a personal affront, a rejection of the future he believed he had built for the two of them. The jealousy, once sporadic, now became a constant presence. In increasingly possessive behavior, Alexander monitored Anastasia, questioning where she was going, who she was talking to, and even why she dressed a certain way. Then, the tension reached its peak. According to witness statements and case records, Alexander discovered that Anastasia was in contact with a man named Nikita Ivanov. A simple notification of a message on her phone, followed by an unfamiliar name, was enough to trigger a contained and disturbing fury in Alexander. He searched Anastasia's device and found conversations that, to him, confirmed his worst suspicions. Anastasia was involved in an affair. The content of the messages was unclear, and there was no definitive proof of infidelity. However, for Alexander, the evidence was enough. The betrayal didn't need to be proven. The mere thought was unbearable. From that moment, the situation spiraled out of control. Witnesses claimed that Alexander began confronting Anastasia, demanding explanations, monitoring her every move, and obsessively interrogating her about her contacts and friendships. The couple could barely hold a conversation without tempers flaring. Anastasia, tired and frightened by Alexander's intensity, reaffirmed her desire to leave and move in with her daughter to her mother's house. The arguments between them became increasingly violent. In one of these confrontations, Anastasia allegedly stated that she wanted freedom and was not willing to stay with someone who did not trust her. Alexander interpreted the word freedom as absolute abandonment, not just the end of the marriage, but a direct threat to the secure world he believed he had built. In his mind, everything seemed to be collapsing: the marriage, the family, the home, and his own identity. Jealousy and frustration turned into resentment. In a desperate act, Alexander decided that if he couldn't keep that family together, he would destroy it. On the night of November 12, 2021, the tension that had been building finally exploded. Alexander Kuznetsov, consumed by a mix of jealousy and rancor, was determined to settle what he considered an unforgivable affront. Anastasia had once again declared her intention to leave him and take their daughter with her. According to records obtained in the investigation, he interpreted this as the final loss of everything he believed he possessed and protected. This disturbing thought pushed him to a point of no return. It all began with a heated argument in the living room. Alexander was questioning Anastasia about her alleged relationship with Nikita Ivanov, insisting that she confess something that, in his mind, was already a confirmed truth. Anastasia tried to respond, but Alexander's mounting accusations and aggressive tone quickly spiraled into a loss of control. As the conflict intensified, he pushed her into the bedroom and attacked her with unusual violence, delivering stabs that would later be identified as the fatal cause of Anastasia's injuries. The crime, however, didn't end there. During the attack, the couple's 3-year-old daughter, who was in the other room, heard the screams and went toward the bedroom, drawn by the commotion and possibly in desperation to help her mother. In a final act of despair, Anastasia told her daughter to leave, but the girl was already caught up in the terrible scene unfolding. For Alexander, the child's presence was now a new problem. She was not only witnessing the crime, but, in his distorted understanding, would forever carry the psychological consequences of that moment. In a state of insanity, driven by jealousy and fear of losing his family, Alexander decided that his daughter should also die. He approached her and grabbed her, squeezing her small hands until silence returned to the room. In a brutal moment, he placed his daughter's body next to her mother's on the bed. The ordered placement of the bodies, almost ceremonial, indicated a mind that, though overtaken by violence, sought one final moment of control and organization. Immediately after the crime, Alexander seemed unsure of what to do. In the bloody bedroom, he found Anastasia's cell phone, which, unbeknownst to him, had recorded the sound of the entire attack. He downloaded the file to his own phone as a kind of final record of what he had done, perhaps conscious that at some point he would have to confront that sound. Feeling the weight of what he had just done, Alexander, in a rare flash of lucidity, leaned over his daughter's body and murmured, "Forgive me, daughter. Someday, if there is a chance, you will forgive me." His voice was trembling, muffled, almost like an unconscious lament. This final message was not just a plea for forgiveness. It was also a pained confession, an acknowledgement of what he had destroyed and of the guilt he could never erase. After this last act, Alexander left the apartment and began walking through the snow, trying to flee. Without a clear destination, he walked miles towards the nearest village, indifferent to exhaustion or physical pain. His initial intention may have been to disappear forever, but reality would catch up with him before he could get very far. The police, alerted by neighbors and family, organized a search of the area. Alexander was located in the early morning, about 15 kilometers from home, walking disoriented through the ice. When approached by the police, he offered little resistance. With a vacant look and his eyes fixed on the ground, he immediately confessed to the crimes, detailing each part of his act with chilling detachment. His arrest marked the end of a tragedy that would shake the community and both families, but it also left a trail of horror and incomprehension. Upon his arrest, Alexander was allowed to make a single phone call. He chose to dial Elena Kuznetsova, Anastasia's mother, who was waiting for news of her daughter. Her voice, filled with concern, anxiously questioned him. Alexander, without preamble, told her what he had done. His words were few and direct. He confessed to taking the lives of Anastasia and his own daughter. Amid the heartbreaking shock that overtook Elena, he asked her to arrange for 2 coffins, one for her daughter and one for her granddaughter. On the other end of the line, Elena let out a cry of pain that echoed into the silence, a cry of someone who had just lost everything. Alexander Kuznetsov's trial began months later, with media coverage and an outraged crowd following the case. During the hearing, he kept his head down, showing no reaction to the graphic descriptions of the crimes he himself had detailed. To every question, he responded with a straightforward confession, without hesitation. His lawyer, aware that there was no possibility of defense, only advised Alexander to cooperate and sincerely recount what he had done that night. As the details emerged, the impact on the public present in the courtroom was palpable. Family members, friends, neighbors, all were visibly shaken. Many wept, others looked on in indignation, and some even shouted when Alexander explained, emotionlessly, how he had taken his daughter's life to spare her from a future that he himself believed was destroyed. At the end of the trial, Alexander, already aware that he would spend the rest of his life in prison, made a surprising request. He asked the judge to apply the death penalty, arguing that his crime was unforgivable and that he himself no longer wished to live. However, the judge informed him that the death penalty was not an option in his jurisdiction. The sentence, in accordance with the prevailing law, was 20 years in a high-security prison, along with mandatory psychiatric treatment. Alexander accepted the decision in silence, without any visible reaction. The court also ruled that he should pay compensation to Anastasia's mother as moral damages, though for Elena, the pain of her loss was irreparable. The sentence brought a mix of relief and outrage to the community. Many believed the punishment was too light for the severity of the crimes, while others, shocked, felt that justice could never fill the void left by such a brutal act. The village of Kvarkino, once small and peaceful, was never the same after that crime. Neighbors, friends, and even strangers carried with them a feeling of insecurity and mistrust that took root deeply. In the village, everyone knew each other. Everyone seemed to know each other's lives, and yet the horror was still possible. Elena, devastated, was rarely seen outside her home. As time passed, her mourning became a constant presence, a shadow hovering over her life. Her only family had been destroyed, and the community, sympathetic, respected her silence, knowing that any attempt at comfort would be insufficient. The story of Alexander, Anastasia, and their daughter became a somber and painful reminder of the consequences of domestic violence and pathological jealousy. In silent conversations and exchanged glances, the village tried to find explanations for the inexplicable, tried to understand how a father and husband had become the executioner of his own family. This crime was not just a personal tragedy, but a scar on the collective memory of the small village of Kvarkino.